Okay, so we're going to look at Sir Thomas Wyatt's poem, I Find No Peace. And before we look at the poem itself, I just want us to think about a bit of context with regard to this poem. Now, Sir Thomas Wyatt lived, as it says in the bottom there, from 1503 to 1542. Obviously, this is during the reign of King Henry VIII. And some important context with regard to this is written at the top. Wyatt was imprisoned twice in his life. People were going in and out of prison all the time during Henry's kind of reign, and depending on whether they were in and out of favour with him. And he fell out of favour twice. The first time, as it says, was for a supposed affair with Anne Boleyn. Of course, Anne Boleyn was Henry VIII's second wife, whom he got a divorce from his first wife and married Anne Boleyn, but then he very much fell out with her after she failed to bear him any male children, and eventually she was famously beheaded. And because Wyatt was supposedly had an affair with her, he was imprisoned at one point. And then secondly, for his association with Thomas Cromwell. Thomas Cromwell was another kind of great advisor of Henry VIII, but Henry fell out with him once he thought that Cromwell was becoming a bit too powerful. All right? So that's really important when we're reading it and thinking about what's happening in this poem. The second thing there is that it says it's also known, Wyatt is also known for bringing the Petrarchan sonnet to England. Okay, now we'll speak about this in a bit more detail later when we speak about the structure of the poem. But Petrarch was an Italian poet. He was in the sort of 13th, 14th century, and he coined the form of sonnet poetry, and that was taken on by Wyatt, brought to England, and then of course it was made particularly famous by the likes of Shakespeare and Marlowe and all his contemporaries throughout that sort of English Renaissance period. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. Okay, let's read the poem. I find no peace, and all my war is done. I fear and hope, I burn and freeze like ice. I fly above the wind, yet can I not arise, and naught I have, and all the world I season. That loseth nor locketh holdeth me in prison, and holdeth me not, yet can I scape no wise. Nor letteth me live nor die at my device, and yet of death it giveth me occasion. Without eyes I see, and without tongue I plain. I desire to perish, and yet I ask health. I love another, and thus I hate myself. I feed me in sorrow and laugh in all my pain. Likewise displeaseth me both life and death, and my delight is causer of this strife. Now, obviously, there's some quite archaic terminology in that poem. This poem was written about 500 years ago. So you will find on the poetry anthology that there is a bit of a glossary which explains the meanings of some of those words. They'll probably become apparent as we are going through this now. Okay, so thinking about that context, thinking about what is going on in this poem, the overarching idea of what's going on, it's pretty safe to say that this is really very much Wyatt's voice which is coming through here. It's a very personal poem. The first three lines start with I, those personal pronouns. And it is indeed a very personal poem. It is Wyatt, okay? And he is, by the looks of it, by the sounds of it, incarcerated at this point. So this seems to be written whilst he is in prison at one of the points in his life. And potentially it could be during that period when he's imprisoned because of his supposed affair with Anne Boleyn. Because not only is there lots of references to the fact that he can't go anywhere, kind of physically, but emotionally in this poem, but also there's a lot of sort of unrequited love stuff going on. All right, and that's the kind of and that's the main theme of the poem. He keeps trying to sort of go places. He keeps trying to sort of get to some sort of emotional stability, but he can't ever quite reach it. He can't ever quite get there. Okay, it's a poem which is full of oxymorons. It's a poem which is full of paradox. Okay, and he's kind of constantly searching for some sort of peace, as he says. But of course, as is made very explicit in the title, he never finds that peace. So that's the overarching idea that's going on, okay? We are now going to sort of go through the poem, break it down bit by bit, and you will notice that I have already highlighted much of the poem in both yellow and green highlighter. The yellow highlighter that I have used is for kind of language points that we can make, and the green is for structural stuff that we can speak about. And as you know from your mark schemes, the best answers are those that speak about both the language and the structure within a poem, and ideally speak about them kind of within the same breath, to consider how they work either with or against each other to create lots and lots of meaning. So I spoke about this paradox, and let's start with that because it is made evident in the first line of the poem, in the title of the poem. This word, I find no peace, okay? And finding's a bit of a strange thing because to find something, you have to search for it. And if you are in the action of searching, then you are never going to be at peace because you are being active here. So this in itself is a paradox, to try and find peace, okay? And already here, he's juxtaposing a few key things. He's juxtaposing in this first line, peace, and then war, okay? He's juxtaposing the two of them. And this juxtaposition continues throughout the poem. You will notice that, he speaks about flying above the wind, but being unable to arise, okay? He speaks about being held down and holdeth me not, yet can I escape, yet he's unable to escape, okay? He can't live or die. So this juxtapositioning, which is throughout the poem, shows his constant internal struggle, okay? He has a constant internal struggle which is going on. And that struggle is both an emotional and physical one, okay? So he is emotionally and physically suffering. But what's particularly interesting about this is that these two sides of him, these juxtaposing things that are going on, are at the same time living in some sort of strange harmony, okay? They are coexisting, and that's shown through this and which we've got going on here. It's not I find no peace but all my war is done. It's I find no peace and all my war is done. There is this ability within his mind, within his situation, for all of these different emotions and ideas to kind of stay in harmony with each other, okay? So let's move on to my next thing that I've got highlighted here. You will see that I've highlighted the F's of the first three lines. We already spoke about the use of the personal pronouns, the fact that this is very much Wyatt's voice, I. Then he goes, I find no peace, I fear and hope, I fly above the wind. And of course, these are use of fricatives. He's got some fricatives which are being used here, okay? Now, these fricatives that are being used, even though he's kind of bravely speaking out in many ways, I think these show his distress, okay? So they show the distress that he is feeling, and that distress sound is almost kind of forcing its way through. I've also highlighted the full stop after hope here, and of course this is a caesura. It's a kind of brilliantly, perfectly placed caesura because it comes after that word hope. And it basically shows that there is no way for the hope to go anywhere. The full stop stops the hope from going anywhere at all. So we'll just write that down as well. Stops that hope from going anywhere. Okay, I burn and freeze like ice, of course, we've got that simile going on. I fly above the wind, yet can I not arise. I love the phrasing of this, and this might just be an archaic turn of phrase, but it's an interesting kind of change of syntax there. We would normally say, and yet I cannot arise, but he says, and yet can I not arise? And that almost makes it sound like a question, okay? It's almost like he is asking someone, why can I not do this? Why can I not go anywhere? I fly above the wind, but I'm not lifting up. I'm not being elevated, okay? And so, I don't know what it is. Is it asking some, greater being? Is it asking God? Is he just asking himself out of pure frustration? But it seems, even though there's no question mark, there is a sort of questioning side to that, okay? So, moving on. Even though Wyatt is, clearly suffering here, he's definitely not suffering quietly. He's making a big thing of it, which in its way is very Petrarchan, and we'll get on to that some more. That's made really clear, I think, in this fourth line where he says, and naught I have, and all the world I season. Now, season is to kind of relish or enjoy, but it's these words, naught and all the world, that I'm interested in, these sort of superlatives that he uses here. These hyperbolic language that's being used. Okay? You say, I've got nothing, but I relish all the world. Okay, and what they do is they really highlight that paradox. Okay, these superlatives highlight the paradox that he's going through. He then goes on to speak about being in prison. Okay, and we know here they hold me in prison. This is for the suspected adultery. So we've got our suspected adultery there. But I think the noticeable thing from this line and the one that follows is the use of the sibilants. Loseth, locketh, holdeth, letteth, okay? All of this sibilance going on. And it's all used because he's a bit pathetic, okay? It's this soft sound which almost suggests that he has given up hope, okay? There's a lot of hope that he has here. He's not feeling it, and he goes very quickly from this hyperbolic statement, naught I have and all the world I season, and then he goes into these three lines of being quite sort of downbeat, I suppose. And then with that downbeatedness comes this semantic field of death and imprisonment. He's spoken about prison, but then it's death, die at my device, okay? And it really becomes quite sort of low in tone. So we've got this semantic field of death that takes over. And he's upset here because, nor letteth me live, nor die at my device. And that my device is by my own will or power. So basically, he's unable to commit suicide. He's unable to even do that. That power has sort of been taken away from him. Okay? So he feels completely powerless. Which he's obviously not very happy about. But then he speaks of death, and yet of death. And yet of death, it giveth me occasion. And that's a strange thing. He's sort of suggesting that, death is an occasion. Death is at least something of substance. But maybe here he could be talking about the execution of Anne Boleyn. if we imagine that our man Wyatt is locked up in the Tower of London, he might be looking out of one of the windows in his tall dungeon and be able to look down and see Anne Boleyn's head being lopped off. And so maybe this is the occasion he's talking about. Death giveth me occasion. It's the most exciting thing that's happened to him all week. Although he's obviously not going to be very happy about it if he was indeed having an affair with her. But he goes on then to say, without iron I see, and without tongue I plane. And that's sort of saying that he's unable to express himself in any sort of way. I desire to perish, and yet I ask for health. And actually this P kind of comes out of nowhere as a sort of plosive, which does suggest that there's this sort of release of strong negative emotion. Releases. So it's all falling very much apart for him here. Okay? I love another, and yet... I love another, and thus I hate myself. I feed me in sorrow and laugh in all my pain. So this loving another, well, we could guess perhaps that this person is Anne Boleyn. Okay? Maybe. It's just conjecture. And then perhaps he hates himself because of the immorality of it. Or maybe it's because he feels that he is more loyal to Henry. Or maybe, he just hates himself because it got him into all this trouble in the first place. Okay. But definitely what we can say about this, I love another, and thus I hate myself, is we are now dipping into typically Petrarchan sonnet content, okay? Petrarch, as I said, wrote sonnets generally from the perspective of a young lover with unrequited love, okay? So this is typically Petrarchan. The old story of unrequited love. So if we think about Romeo at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, he's in love before he meets Juliet. He is in love with another woman who is called Rosaline, and he's, and that's unrequited love. That's typical, young person who loves someone else. Okay, so I love another, and thus I hate myself. I feed me in sorrow and laugh at all my pain. And so actually that again is typically Petrarchan. He sort of weirdly relishes this sadness that he has. He's sunk into it so much. It's kind of consumed him, and he now kind of can't do without it. He feeds upon his own sorrow. Likewise displeaseth me both life and death. So he doesn't like either of them now. He doesn't want either. He's not happy in life or in death. Unhappy both in life and in death. Okay, and this is almost a sort of Volta at the end. We typically have Voltas, turning points at the end of sonnets. In Shakespeare, there's always a turning point in the final rhyming couplet, and you'd normally have a word like and yet or but, or in this case likewise. So it's almost a Volta here, and the realization being that he's unhappy both in life and death. Okay? And he then goes on in the final line to say, and my delight is causer of this strife. And again, his delight is Anne Boleyn. Maybe that is his delight again. Anne Boleyn has caused all these issues for him. But he's now the important thing is he is resigned to his fate, okay? And actually that shows that he has come somewhere over the course of the poem. He's made some sort of realizations. He starts off with all this juxtaposition, all this paradox, but then by the end of it he sort of goes, you know what, I just don't really care. Whatever now happens. happens. So that's us having gone through the poem. So let's just speak now about the overarching structure. I've mentioned our man Petrarch quite a lot, that 14th century poet, wrote from the perspective of young lovers who had sort of unrequited love was never returned. And that's definitely what Wyatt takes on here. Of course, this is written in the sonnet form, which means it's 14 lines. It is broken up into one octet, one sestet, okay, and a rhyming final couplet. Or really, we can look at it as three quatrains. So that's 3 groups of 4 lines and a final rhyming couplet. We'll get to that rhyming couplet in a bit. So if we're looking at this rhyme scheme, you'll notice that I've already marked it as being A, B, B, A. Done, ice, arise, season, prison, wise, device, occasion, plain, health, myself, pain. Okay. Now, this is obviously very structured, all right? And I think there's a reason for this structure that's being used here, this A, B, B, A rhyme scheme. This is actually called an enclosed rhyme scheme. Okay, I'm just going to write it down the bottom here. Enclosed rhyme scheme. Okay, so as opposed to having, alternate rhymes or something like that. Okay, and I think this very much shows that Wyatt is trapped within his prison. He is enclosed within something. Okay, so the structure is reflective of his situation. I'm just going to write that down. Structure reflective of prison situation. So he's very much sort of locked in there. Okay. Though having said that, the final couplet doesn't quite rhyme. It's a sort of half rhyme, death and strife. And that's a bit of a strange thing. What does this show? Does it show that he is, losing it at the end? Does it show that he's sort of given up? Does it show that he's breaking free from prison in some sort of way, breaking free from his constraints? I'm not sure. Maybe it shows that he's not even as much in love as he thought he was. There's a whole number of things that could be used, but it's very much a weak final rhyme, and I'll leave that up to you to interpret. Okay. Now, Petrarch wrote in iambs as well. He largely wrote in iambic pentameter, though he wrote in sort of what are called hendecasyllabic rhymes, which is 11 syllables to a line rather than the 10 that Shakespeare has, that we're used to with the iambic pentameter, the 5 iambs, didum 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 didum. And there is relentless iambic pentameter in this, especially in the second quatrain. So that's lines 5 through to 8. If we just look at this here, that loseth nor locketh holdeth me in prison, and holdeth me not yet can I escape no wise, nor letteth me live nor die at my device, and yet of death it giveth me occasion. Okay, so what's weird here is there's this relentless iambic pentameter, but all the lines are 10 plus syllables. They all go sort of 11 syllables or so. Okay, and again, this could reflect his imprisonment. This relentless iambic pentameter shows that he is trapped, not just by the rhyme scheme, not just by his words, but also by the rhythm. Okay, shows entrapment. So it shows trapped by the rhythm. Okay, so it could show that as well. But the 10 plus lines, what do those show? Well, it could be his ability to escape prison. Or, again, it could just be his confusion. It could just be its confusion. What we can be quite certain of, I suppose, is this iambic pentameter. It's a sonnet. Iams, de-dum, 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 kind of reflects the heartbeat. Okay, we know this is all to do with love in some regard, even if it is the kind of bittersweet, unrequited love that he feels in this typically Petrarchan sonnet. All right, I think that brings us to the end.